Underway in the General Assembly on some other issues. One has to do with the power of the state's attorney general. Democrat Jeff Jackson won the seat back in November, scored about a 3-point win over his Republican opponent Dan Bishop. Since taking office, Jackson has joined other Democratic attorneys general across the country in filing legal challenges against moves made by the Trump administration. He was part of lawsuits challenging the president's executive order doing away with birthright citizenship. He also sued over the slashing of federal grants that impacted research being done at state universities. Both were successful in getting injunctions to pause those orders. But now Republican lawmakers want to put a stop to any more lawsuits. The Senate passed a bill that would ban the state attorney general from joining any legal actions challenging presidential executive orders. Mecklenburg County Democrat Woodson Bradley thinks it's a bad idea.
I call it the Kingmaker bill because if you take away the attorney general's his position and his job title and what he does to enforce and call out unlawful actions, I have a real issue with that. This is not a Democratic or Republican issue, and I want to make that crystal clear.
No Republicans went on camera to talk about that bill. Meantime, there is another one that just passed the Senate. It's also getting a lot of attention tonight. Senate Bill 227 is called Eliminating DEI in Public Education. Of course, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Supporters say it will prohibit promoting discriminatory policies and practices in public schools.
The thing we want to do is provide equal opportunities for all students, not equal outcomes. And I think we can all agree that the discriminatory practices and divisive concepts that seem to be permeating some of our trainings and some of the things that are going on in some school districts around the state are things that we need to stop doing.
Senator Michael Lee there, co-sponsor of the bill. It defines 12 specific concepts to be removed from the classroom. Concepts supporters say are divisive and have students judging each other based on things like race or sex.
Who gets to determine what is divisive? At what point, what can you point to history that you said is or is not divisive? It talks about people being uncomfortable. So, sometimes history is not comfortable, but ultimately we're in that classroom to teach truths, and it should be independent of a person's personal feelings.
Senator Caleb Theodros, a Democrat from Charlotte, voted against the bill. All Democrats did the same. He says the measure will impede on teachers' ability to teach.
It was ultimately a disappointment. I think a lot of the folks in that chamber have a misunderstanding what diversity, equity, and inclusion is, not realizing that equity is a prerequisite to a meritocracy. Those things are not mutually exclusive.
This legislation is not intended to undermine diversity, equity, or inclusion in the broader sense. The purpose of the bill is that these DEI frameworks that have been institutionalized have actually done just the opposite of what I think most people intended them to provide.
Now, both of these bills, the DEI and the Attorney General bill, still have to get through the House. If they pass, they likely face a veto from Governor Stein. And in this legislative session, Republicans do not have a supermajority to automatically override. So they would need at least one Democrat to go along. We'll stay on top of those for you. Let's take a live look.